I should say that Queensland Heritage Council contributed to the residential study that Jim ran for heritage chairs and officials. It didn't contribute to the commercial building study, but heritage chairs and officials, and Jim in particular, was kind enough to make sure there were Queensland buildings in that study. So we won all round. Our next session is Matthew Smith, probably looking at real-world examples and some reality checks for us in terms of the adaptive reuse of heritage buildings, and in this case, two of those, the Barracks in Brisbane and Cairns Wharf in Cairns. Matthew is an architect with Arkhefield, wide-range project experience from detached housing to large mixed-use developments, as well as a number of heritage projects. He's been with Arkhefield since 2004, and he's taken responsibility for driving the pursuit of sustainable design practices within that organisation. He's worked on projects that have targeted 4 to 5 star NABERS ratings and 5-star Green Star ratings for buildings, and he's completed a number of research projects, including a presentation on affordable 6-star Green Star for multi-unit residential developments. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Matthew.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to start with a little warning because I've got a lot to cram into this sort of short time frame. So I've got quite a scripted talk, and the problem with that is it sort of loses the enthusiasm that I have for it. So just keep in mind, I am enthusiastic and I'm very excited to be here talking about 2 recent Arkhefield projects that have looked at the sustainable adaptive reuse of heritage buildings. For those of you who don't know Arkhefield, we're a Brisbane-based architecture and interior design practice specialising in creating challenging and meaningful architecture, and our work encompasses very large to the very small in a range of commercial, institutional, residential and hospitality projects with a focus of building great relationships and architectural outcomes. And we're committed to innovative architecture, sustainably, socially responsible buildings, being team-focused and supporting each other through our actions and communicating in an open, honest and constructive way. The photo up there is our studio, and we're located in a really beautiful heritage-listed building at 418 Adelaide Street. Our semi-official office motto is memorable or meaningful architecture and a great place to work. And the focus of this phrase is not only on the end result, but also on the process, which is really important to us. For us, memorable architecture is meaningful architecture, and meaningful architecture addresses sustainability in all its forms. We strongly believe in a collaborative design approach, and this involves an ongoing open dialogue, not only with the consultant team and the clients, but with authorities, communities, contractors, and even subcontractors. And we find that the best results are achieved when we're able to engage with all these players and tease out the issues, as opposed to a more traditional approach of anticipating issues and required solutions to them. The first project I'm going to look at is the former police barracks at Petrie Terrace. Petrie Terrace. On this project, Arkhefield were the base building architects. Michael Kennedy, who I did see around, and Robert Riddell were the heritage architects. Tom Blake provided historical and archaeological advice, and Bassett, Surnow, ACOM were the service consultants. The whole precinct was constructed by Hutchinson Builders as a D&C contract, and this allowed us a high level of interaction with Hutchies and also their key subcontractors from the design stage onwards. In this form of delivery, we're able to collaboratively address issues as required and collectively work out solutions. My involvement on the project was from concept design through to construction. I spent a lot of time working on conceptual solutions for the reuse of the heritage buildings, and after that was the project architect on the new commercial building associated with it, and this included a connection with the existing barracks building. Now, this being a Heritage Council event, I should let you know about the history of the site. The site was first the home of the Brisbane Jail, which was the first prison built in Queensland after the convict period. Construction started in 1858 and finished in 1861. And when it was completed, the jail housed 48 cells with 4 men in each cell. And one of my strongest memories of this time was being on site when the archaeological excavations were going on and standing within the footings of one of those cells, and I could literally stretch out my arms and almost touch the walls in either direction, and there were sort of 4 men sleeping in that together. There were two-storey cell blocks and associated service buildings, and eventually the jail was surrounded by a stone wall. The jail had overcrowding problems almost from its beginnings, and it was eventually replaced in 1883 by the Boggo Road Jail. At that time, the site was given over to the Queensland Police Force, and all the original jail buildings, except for 2 entrance buildings and a kitchen, were demolished. And then the police force constructed 6 predominantly timber buildings between 1901 and 1938. And of these buildings, the only one that remains is the old stables building, which was built in 1912, and that's on the entrance to the precinct when you go there. 1939, the police barracks building that we in Brisbane know was completed. It was designed to replace a number of the existing police buildings. The ground floor contained offices and storerooms, a lecture room, kitchens and a mess hall, and the upper 2 floors contained dormitories, bathrooms and recreational rooms. At this time, the last of the 3 original jail buildings were demolished, along with 2 dormitory buildings, to make way for the parade ground. The site was used by the police until the mid-80s, when the site was sold off for private development. It's had a very difficult history of development. It's been the subject of protracted objections and legal battles over its heritage listing. There's been numerous schemes that were held up in council and other ones that weren't financially viable. And as a result, the site was largely abandoned for 20 years. And during this time, squatters occupied the main barracks building and it was subjected to extensive damage and graffiti. In 2003, Arkhefield were approached by the Urban Renewal Task Force to create what became known as the City West Master Plan. The scope of this was the former police barracks, which is this area here, and the Army's Victoria Barracks up there. And the key elements of the master plan were linking of Caxton Street through the police barracks site to Roma Street, and the linking of the Victoria Barracks to Roma Street parklands, both with new bridges. And the master plan also set out development outcomes for both sites. And because of this work, we were approached in 2005 by the developer to come up with a feasible outcome for the police barracks site. Before we get into detail on that, I just wanted to go through a couple of general principles that we've found going through a couple of these projects. The first is the implementation of sustainable design on the reuse of any buildings. And the key limitations are the inherited building orientation, thermal mass, natural ventilation opportunities, and the often limited zones for providing modern services. And this is further limited by the scope for changing the fabric and the need to maintain the heritage character of buildings because of its heritage nature. With that in mind, we did inherit some really good things in the building. It has fantastic natural ventilation, so you can see that there's cross links of airflow through most of the building. There's shaded verandas which reduce the solar loading on the building fabric and create nice cooler spaces outside the rooms. Has high thermal mass with its brick and concrete construction, and the orientation of it for solar access is quite decent. It's on the city grid, so it faces northwest, which it's not ideal, but it's not too bad, and the east and west ends of the buildings are contained with service areas.